Manhattan, October 15th, 1958, 11:47 p.m. For the first time in his 20-year career, Captain Frank Morrison felt his knees trembling as he stood before a door he never imagined he'd approach willingly. The most prejudiced police captain in Harlem was about to knock on the door of a man he had always considered his sworn enemy. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson's door. Morrison clutched an envelope in his weathered hands that had thrown countless punches, signed dozens of arrest warrants, and pointed accusatory fingers at men who looked exactly like the one he was about to face. Inside that envelope was a proposition that would forever alter the delicate balance of power in New York City. 48 hours from this moment, Harlem would be standing tall while Morrison would be drafting his retirement papers, wondering if he had made a deal with the devil or discovered an unlikely angel. This is the story of how a racist cop found himself begging for help from his greatest adversary, and how the consequences defied every expectation he had built over decades of bitter conflict. October 1958 had transformed Harlem into something resembling a battlefield from the Great War. Except this time the casualties were mounting on American soil, in American neighborhoods where American children played. The power vacuum left by Bumpy Johnson's imprisonment had unleashed a chaos unlike anything the city had witnessed in its complex history of territorial disputes. Three distinct criminal organizations were tearing Harlem apart with methodical brutality, each claiming portions of the neighborhood like European powers carving up distant continents. The Puerto Rican Los Diablos controlled the southern blocks with iron discipline and hair-trigger tempers. The Italian Rossini brothers had established dominance over the northern territories through old-world intimidation tactics and new-world firepower. Meanwhile, the Jamaican Babylon Boys held the central core with an unpredictable mixture of reggae rhythm and calculated violence. Every sunrise brought fresh corpses. Every sunset brought grieving families. The body count climbed relentlessly. 17 in September, 30 more in the first half of October. These weren't just statistics and police reports. They were sons who would never return home for Sunday dinner, fathers who would never again read bedtime stories, brothers whose empty chairs at family gatherings served as permanent reminders of a war nobody asked for. Captain Frank Morrison had ruled Harlem's police precinct for 2 decades with an iron fist wrapped in institutional racism. He was the archetypal authoritarian officer of his generation, a man who viewed every dark-skinned face as inherently suspicious, who believed courtesy was wasted on people he considered beneath his social station, and who preferred to communicate through intimidation rather than investigation. Morrison represented everything wrong with law enforcement in America's most tumultuous decade, yet he possessed one undeniable quality that complicated his character: genuine intelligence. During Morrison's years of hostile oversight, he had encountered many criminals, but none had challenged him intellectually quite like Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Where other street operators relied on brute force and territorial instinct, Bumpy approached organized crime like a chess master contemplating his next 12 moves while his opponents struggled to understand the current position. Morrison had grudgingly observed that the years between 1952 and 1958, when Bumpy was imprisoned in Alcatraz, had brought relative stability to Harlem. Johnson's organization operated with systematic precision that minimized collateral damage and maintained clear boundaries. Large-scale conflicts were rare. Civilian casualties remained at historic lows. The neighborhood functioned according to unwritten rules that everyone understood, even if nobody officially acknowledged them. But with Bumpy's absence, that delicate equilibrium had shattered completely. The past 60 days had produced 47 deaths, including innocent bystanders whose only crime was existing in the wrong place during the wrong moment. The breaking point arrived when 8-year-old Lucy Williams was struck down by a stray bullet during a fierce firefight between rival factions. The child had been walking home from school, clutching her arithmetic homework, when violence erupted around her like a sudden thunderstorm. Mayor Robert Wagner had delivered Morrison an ultimatum with the finality of a judge pronouncing sentence. "Captain, you will restore order to Harlem within 1 week, or you will submit your resignation. The people of this city deserve better than daily war zones in their neighborhoods." Morrison had exhausted every conventional law enforcement strategy in his playbook. Aggressive raids that rounded up dozens of suspects had failed to disrupt the fundamental power structure. Economic pressure through business license revocations and building inspections had merely pushed operations underground. Attempts at divide-and-conquer tactics through informants had backfired when those informants turned up dead in increasingly creative and disturbing ways. The three gangs fighting for control shared none of Bumpy Johnson's strategic discipline. Los Diablos operated on pure emotion and machismo, viewing every slight as worthy of lethal retaliation. The Rossini brothers brought old country vendettas and blood feuds that traced back generations to Sicily's lawless mountain villages. Babylon Boys functioned according to Jamaican ghetto logic that prioritized respect above profit and reputation above reason. Traditional police work proved utterly inadequate against this unholy trinity of violence. Morrison discovered that arresting foot soldiers accomplished nothing when new recruits appeared overnight to replace them. Shutting down one operation simply caused two others to expand into the vacant territory. Every tactical success created strategic complications that multiplied like malignant cells. Sitting in his office at 3 a.m., surrounded by crime scene photographs and autopsy reports, Morrison finally admitted the truth he had been avoiding for weeks. There was only one person in all of New York City capable of ending this carnage. That person was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. Bumpy had returned from Alcatraz on March 6, 1963, expecting to reclaim his former empire and resume operations where he had left them 6 years earlier. Instead, he discovered that his carefully constructed criminal organization had collapsed into competing fragments. His trusted lieutenants were either dead or had switched allegiances, and the younger generation viewed him as an outdated relic from a bygone era. The Harlem that welcomed Bumpy home was unrecognizable from the neighborhood he had once controlled with quiet efficiency. Residents barricaded themselves inside their apartments after dark, afraid to venture onto streets that had become unpredictable killing fields. Local businesses operated behind bulletproof glass and steel security doors. Children learned to recognize the distinctive sounds of different firearms and to drop flat against sidewalks at the first hint of approaching gunfire. Bumpy spent his first 2 weeks conducting methodical reconnaissance, moving through the community like an anthropologist studying a foreign culture. He needed to understand the new power dynamics, identify key players in each organization, map territorial boundaries, and assess the loyalty of his former associates. Every conversation provided crucial intelligence. Every observation contributed to a growing strategic picture. Who controlled which street corners? Which police officers accepted bribes, and which remained stubbornly honest? What grievances fueled the ongoing violence? How did ordinary citizens view the deteriorating situation? Bumpy filled notebook after notebook with detailed observations, building comprehensive files on everyone who mattered in Harlem's new criminal ecosystem. It was during this careful intelligence-gathering phase that Captain Morrison made his desperate midnight visit. When Morrison's knock echoed through the quiet brownstone, Bumpy opened the door personally, despite having 3 armed bodyguards positioned strategically throughout the building. The two men studied each other across the threshold, Morrison with his weathered Irish face and perpetually suspicious expression, Bumpy with his analytical eyes and unreadable composure. 20 years of mutual antagonism hung between them like an invisible barrier. Morrison had arrested Bumpy dozens of times on charges ranging from gambling and racketeering to assault and conspiracy. Bumpy had outmaneuvered Morrison's investigations repeatedly, using legal technicalities, witness intimidation, and political connections to escape conviction. They knew each other's methods, respected each other's intelligence, and absolutely despised everything the other represented. "Captain," Bumpy said, his voice carrying no surprise, despite the unprecedented nature of this visit. "This is an interesting hour for a social call." Morrison's shirt was soaked with nervous perspiration, despite the cool October evening. This visit represented professional suicide, if discovered by his superiors or fellow officers. The sight of Harlem's most racist police captain seeking assistance from a notorious black criminal would end his career instantly and destroy his reputation permanently. "May I come inside?" Morrison asked, hating the pleading tone that crept into his voice. Bumpy stepped aside and gestured toward the living room. Morrison entered reluctantly, surprised by what he encountered. The space reflected sophisticated taste and genuine education. Leather-bound books lined built-in shelves. Classical music played softly from a high-quality stereo system. And original artwork adorned walls painted in warm, welcoming colors. This was not the lair of a common street thug. "Can I offer you something to drink?" Bumpy inquired with the courtesy of a gracious host. "No thank you," Morrison replied curtly. Desperate to maintain some semblance of professional distance, they sat in matching leather chairs, facing each other across a polished coffee table laden with current magazines and academic journals. The silence stretched uncomfortably as both men calculated their next moves in this unprecedented chess match. "To what do I owe this unexpected pleasure?" Bumpy asked eventually, his tone suggesting genuine curiosity rather than sarcasm. Morrison took a shuddering breath, aware that his next words would irrevocably change the trajectory of both their lives. "Harlem has become hell on earth. 47 people have died in the past 60 days. Innocent civilians included. Last night, 8-year-old Lucy Williams." "I know," Bumpy interrupted gently. "Stray bullet during the firefight between Los Diablos and the Rossini brothers. The child was carrying her arithmetic homework." Morrison stared in amazement. "How do you know these details?" "I live in this community, Captain. Unlike some people, I actually talk to the residents and listen to their concerns." The implicit criticism stung because it was accurate. Morrison had spent 2 decades viewing Harlem through the lens of his patrol car windshield, seeing residents as potential suspects rather than human beings deserving protection and respect. "Look, Johnson," Morrison began, forcing himself to use a more respectful tone. "You and I have a complicated history. We both acknowledge that, but the current situation transcends our personal differences." "Continue," Bumpy said simply. "These gangs are completely out of control. They operate without your systematic approach or strategic thinking. While you were away, order collapsed entirely. And I must confess that I cannot restore stability using conventional police methods." A slight smile played at the corners of Bumpy's mouth. "So your traditional law enforcement techniques have proven inadequate to the current challenge." Morrison gritted his teeth but nodded. "Correct. And now you wish to collaborate with me?" "Yes." Bumpy rose from his chair and walked to the window overlooking the street below. Despite the late hour, the sidewalks were completely empty, a stark contrast to the vibrant neighborhood life that had once characterized these blocks. Fear had driven everyone indoors. "What exactly are you requesting from me?" "End these gang wars. Restore peace. Return things to how they were before." Bumpy turned back to face Morrison directly. "You mean return to the situation where I controlled Harlem while you looked the other way?" "Exactly. And in exchange, what are you prepared to offer me?" Morrison had anticipated this question and prepared his response. "Money, protection from federal prosecution. What do you want?" "Neither of those, Captain. I want something much more significant." Morrison's pulse quickened ominously. Bumpy's smile became distinctly calculating, revealing the strategic mind that had once made him Harlem's most successful crime boss. "I will give you 48 hours to restore order to Harlem completely. In that time, I will eliminate the gang war, re-establish stability, and return the neighborhood to peaceful operations. But in exchange, I require this. For those 48 hours, you will withdraw all police personnel from Harlem. No patrol cars will enter this neighborhood. No arrests will be made. No investigations will be conducted. You will close your eyes and allow me to work without interference." Morrison felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. Do you understand what might happen without police presence?" "Of course I understand. Justice will be served." "Justice?" "Yes. The kind of justice your legal system has consistently failed to provide." Morrison's mind raced through the implications. If he withdrew police protection for 48 hours and something terrible occurred, his career would end in disgrace and possible criminal charges. But if the gang wars continued, his career would end anyway, along with more innocent lives. "I know your definition of justice, Johnson. Blood will flow in rivers. Bumpy approached Morrison's chair and sat down directly across from him. Captain, who was responsible for Lucy Williams' death last week. A stray bullet during gang crossfire. No. Which specific individual fired the shot that killed that child? Morrison remained silent. Miguel Santana, second in command of Los Diablos. On the day Lucy died, Santana was losing heavily at poker and drinking excessively. In his frustration, he drew his weapon and began firing randomly. One of his bullets struck Lucy Williams in the chest. Morrison was stunned. How do you know this? Because I conduct real investigations while you merely file paperwork and make arrests based on convenience rather than evidence. We could arrest Miguel Santana. And what would happen then? He would receive a light sentence, serve 18 months in minimum security, and return to the streets more dangerous than before. Your system doesn't work, Captain. Morrison sat quietly for several minutes, wrestling with moral and practical considerations that had no clear resolution. Finally, he asked, "What happens after 48 hours? After 48 hours, there will be only one gang leader remaining in Harlem. Me. And you can return to your normal police duties. But this time, you'll be dealing with a systematic, controlled organization that prioritizes minimizing civilian casualties. And if I refuse your offer, then I will still end the gang wars, but I'll have to work around your constant interference. The process will take longer and create more complications for everyone involved." Morrison stood up slowly, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. "I need time to consider this. You have 6 hours. Inform me of your decision by 6 a.m. After that, the opportunity expires." Morrison walked toward the door, pausing at the threshold. "Johnson, if this plan goes wrong, it won't go wrong. How can you be so confident?" Bumpy smiled one final time. "Because I am Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson." Morrison left the brownstone and walked slowly through empty Harlem streets, his mind churning through impossible choices. 6 hours to decide between professional suicide and moral compromise. 6 hours to choose between certain career destruction and uncertain partnership with his greatest enemy. At 5:30 a.m., Morrison's telephone rang in his sparse apartment. He answered on the second ring. "I accept your terms," he said without preamble. 48 hours. "But if a single innocent civilian is harmed, our agreement ends immediately." "Understood," Bumpy replied. "Withdraw your officers by 6 a.m. Morrison hung up and stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at him belonged to a man who had just crossed a line he could never uncross. At exactly 6 a.m., patrol cars began their unprecedented withdrawal from Harlem. Radio dispatchers announced the official explanation: special security operation in the Harlem district requires temporary suspension of regular police patrols. The words felt hollow to Morrison as he watched his officers drive away from neighborhoods that desperately needed protection, leaving residents at the mercy of whatever Bumpy Johnson had planned. Gang leaders initially couldn't comprehend this dramatic shift. No police presence in Harlem? How was such a thing possible? The absence of authority created a vacuum that each faction interpreted as an opportunity to settle scores without consequences. But they would soon discover that the absence of police didn't mean the absence of justice. It simply meant a different, more direct form of accountability was about to unfold. At 8:15 a.m., Los Diablos gathered in their headquarters, a converted apartment building, where Miguel Santana held court among his 10 most trusted soldiers. They were sharing coffee and planning their next territorial expansion when someone knocked on the reinforced steel door. "Who is it?" Santana shouted, his hand instinctively moving toward his concealed weapon. "Delivery service," came the muffled reply. When they opened the door, they found no delivery person, only a small wooden box sitting on the doormat. Attached was an envelope marked "For Miguel Santana," from Ellsworth Johnson. Santana ripped open the package with growing curiosity. Inside lay a black and white photograph of Lucy Williams in her tiny casket, surrounded by white lilies and her devastated family. Beneath the heartbreaking image, handwritten words delivered a chilling ultimatum: "You murdered an 8-year-old child. Be at Lenox Park at noon. Come alone. If you don't appear, I will find your mother, your sister, and your younger brother. This is not a threat. It's a promise." Santana tore the photograph in half, laughing bitterly. "This old man thinks he can intimidate me? Does he believe I'll be frightened by his empty threats?" But even as he spoke those defiant words, telephones throughout the building began ringing simultaneously. Santana's mother called frantically. A mysterious fire had started in her kitchen, forcing evacuation of her entire apartment building. His sister phoned in tears. Her car had been stolen from a locked garage in broad daylight. His teenage brother failed to come home from school, with teachers reporting he had simply vanished during lunch period. Santana understood immediately that these were not random coincidences. Someone had orchestrated these events with surgical precision to send an unmistakable message. At exactly noon, Lenox Park stood eerily empty, except for two figures. Santana arrived punctually, his swagger diminished, but his pride still intact. Across the open lawn, Bumpy Johnson waited alone, apparently unarmed, hands clasped behind his back like a patient schoolmaster. "Santana," Bumpy called out in his characteristically calm voice. "You killed 8-year-old Lucy Williams in cold blood." "It was an accident," Santana protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "Nobody intended for that child to die, but she did die. And you fired the weapon that ended her life." "Who appointed you judge and jury?" Santana demanded, reaching for his concealed pistol. "You're just another street criminal, trying to reclaim expired territory." "I am Harlem's conscience," Bumpy replied simply. "And you spilled innocent blood on these streets." Santana drew his weapon, but before he could aim, 15 men emerged from concealment positions throughout the park. Each had a rifle trained directly on Santana's chest. The young gang leader found himself surrounded by a perfect circle of imminent death. "Do you have any final words?" Bumpy inquired, his tone suggesting genuine interest in Santana's response. Santana's hand trembled as reality penetrated his bravado. "My family, leave them alone. This is my responsibility, not theirs." "Your family is already safe," Bumpy assured him. "They were never in real danger, but you must answer for Lucy Williams' family, who will never be safe from their grief." "The police will come." "For the next 48 hours there are no police in Harlem," Bumpy explained. "Only justice." Santana never heard the gunshot that ended his life. Bumpy's men worked with professional efficiency, leaving no evidence and no witnesses. The body was transported to Los Diablos' headquarters with a note pinned to his shirt: "Justice for Lucy Williams." Next target, the Rossini brothers. At 2:30 p.m., Tony and Marco Rossini discovered Santana's corpse and immediately understood that their world had fundamentally changed. The note's message was unmistakably clear. They were next on someone's methodical list. "Who is this Bumpy Johnson?" Marco asked his older brother, genuine fear creeping into his voice for the first time in years. "He was supposed to be in prison," Tony replied, his hands shaking as he lit his third cigarette in 10 minutes. "Word was he got out, but nobody thought he'd return to active operations." "Well, he's obviously very active now. What do we do?" Tony considered their limited options. Los Diablos' leader was dead, which meant only two gangs remained, the Rossini brothers and Babylon boys. Perhaps they could form an alliance against this new threat. "Marco, gather every soldier we have. Full weapons, maximum security. We're going to war." But Tony underestimated his opponent's strategic thinking. This wouldn't be war. It would be systematic extermination. At 6:45 p.m., the Rossini brothers' warehouse served as fortress for their emergency council of war. 12 armed men filled the space, checking weapons and planning defensive positions. 2 sentries guarded the entrance while others monitored windows and potential escape routes. The sentries never saw their attackers coming. Bumpy's men moved like professional soldiers, neutralizing guards silently and efficiently. Within minutes, both entrance guards were unconscious, but alive. Bumpy had given explicit orders to minimize unnecessary killing. Inside the warehouse, the emergency meeting continued until all lights suddenly died, plunging the space into absolute darkness. 12 men fumbled for flashlights and weapons, while trying to maintain defensive positions they could no longer see. Then Bumpy's voice filled the warehouse through hidden speakers, clear and authoritative as a radio announcer. Tony and Marco Rossini. Last week's territorial dispute with Babylon Boys resulted in 4 innocent civilians being wounded by stray gunfire. Among them was 67-year-old Martha Anderson, whose hip was shattered by one of your bullets. She remains hospitalized in critical condition. Bumpy Johnson, Tony shouted into the darkness. Show yourself like a man. I am here, Bumpy replied. And suddenly, the lights returned. He stood in the exact center of the warehouse, completely alone and apparently defenseless. But when Tony and his men reached for their weapons, dozens of laser-targeting dots appeared on their chests and foreheads. Red pinpoints of light danced across every surface, making clear that resistance meant immediate death. Put down your weapons, Bumpy commanded with quiet authority. What gives you the right to demand anything from us? Marco shouted, though he made no move toward his gun. I represent justice for the innocent people you've wounded through your reckless violence. Tony realized their situation was hopeless. What do you want from us? Martha Anderson's medical expenses will be paid in full by your organization. The 3 other civilians wounded in your conflicts will receive comprehensive compensation, and most importantly, you will leave Harlem permanently. And if we refuse? Bumpy gestured toward the laser dots, still decorating their bodies. Miguel Santana also chose to refuse. Tony and Marco exchanged glances. They had built their reputation on being tough negotiators who never backed down from confrontation. But this wasn't negotiation. It was surrender or die. We accept your terms, Tony said quietly. You have 24 hours to evacuate Harlem completely. Do not return. Do not send representatives. Do not attempt revenge. Simply disappear. Bumpy turned and walked away, leaving the Rossini brothers surrounded by their useless weapons and shattered pride. That same night, they loaded their belongings into 2 trucks and drove toward New Jersey, never to return to New York City. Only Babylon Boys remained, and their leader Winston "Dread" Campbell would prove the most formidable challenge. At 10 p.m., Campbell's nightclub pulsed with reggae music and marijuana smoke while gamblers filled back rooms and dancers moved to hypnotic rhythms. Despite the day's dramatic events, Campbell maintained normal operations as if nothing had changed in Harlem's criminal landscape. Campbell was a different breed of criminal than Los Diablos' emotional volatility or the Rossini brothers' old-world brutality. Standing 6 feet 4 inches with the muscled physique of a professional athlete, he had survived Kingston's most violent gang wars before establishing his American empire. He understood strategic thinking and respected intelligent adversaries. At midnight, the club's front door opened, and Bumpy Johnson walked inside alone. Music stopped. Conversations died. Every person in the establishment focused on this legendary figure who had just eliminated 2 rival gangs in less than 12 hours. Campbell sat at his reserved table in the club's elevated VIP section, observing Bumpy's entrance with professional interest rather than fear. As Bumpy approached, Campbell gestured toward an empty chair. The famous Bumpy Johnson, Campbell said, his Jamaican accent giving musical quality to the words. Legend himself honors my establishment. Bumpy sat down and studied Campbell carefully. Winston Campbell, I know your reputation from Kingston. You're not like the others. Campbell laughed, genuine appreciation in his voice. Here you cleaned house today. Los Diablos, finished Rossini brothers running scared. Impressive work, necessary work. Now you come for Babylon Boys? Bumpy leaned forward, his voice dropping to conversational levels despite the club's acoustics. Actually, Winston, I've come to offer you a choice that I didn't extend to the others. Campbell's eyebrows rose with surprise. Neither Los Diablos nor the Rossini brothers had received options beyond submission or death. What kind of choice? You can leave Harlem and establish operations elsewhere in New York, or you can become my partner in a legitimate business arrangement. Campbell had not anticipated this possibility. Why treat me differently? Because you have never killed innocent civilians. During gang conflicts, You maintain strict rules about protecting children, elderly people, and women. That shows character I can respect." Campbell sipped his drink thoughtfully. This conversation was developing in directions he hadn't expected. How would partnership work? You take Brooklyn, run it according to your methods and principles. But Harlem remains my territory. No conflicts between our organizations, no competition for the same resources. Why should I trust you? Bumpy placed a manila envelope on the table. This contains detailed information about your life, your family in Jamaica, your business interests, your personal habits. If I wanted to eliminate you, I could have done so already without this conversation. Campbell opened the envelope and examined its contents. Photographs of his mother's house in Kingston, his sister's children playing in their schoolyard, his legitimate businesses throughout Brooklyn, all taken within the past 48 hours. How did you gather this intelligence so quickly? I am Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, he replied with quiet confidence. Information is my primary weapon. Campbell understood that resistance was futile, but the offered partnership actually represented an attractive business proposition. Brooklyn contained enormous opportunities for expansion. Brooklyn is good territory, he admitted. I accept your offer. The two men shook hands, finalizing an agreement that would reshape New York's criminal landscape for decades to come. Before the 48-hour deadline expired, Harlem's gang war had ended through systematic elimination rather than police intervention. Los Diablos was destroyed, the Rossini brothers had fled to New Jersey, and Babylon Boys had relocated to Brooklyn under negotiated terms. The next morning, Captain Morrison found a comprehensive report waiting on his desk. Captain Morrison, our 48-hour agreement has been completed successfully. Gang warfare in Harlem has ended permanently. Los Diablos organization dissolved, leadership eliminated. Rossini brothers departed New York City. Babylon Boys relocated to Brooklyn. Harlem is now secure. Residents can walk safely. Children can attend school without fear. You may restore normal police patrols. However, understand that I am now the sole authority for organized activities in this neighborhood. Respectfully, E.R. Johnson. Morrison read the report 3 times, then looked out his office window toward Harlem's streets. People were walking normally. Children played in parks. The transformation seemed impossible after months of warfare. His telephone rang. Mayor Wagner's voice boomed with unprecedented enthusiasm. Morrison, whatever you did worked miracles. Harlem hasn't seen a single violent incident in 2 days. How did you accomplish this? Morrison felt a familiar tightness in his throat. Special operations, sir. The details are classified. I don't care about details. Results are what matter. Congratulations, Captain. The phone went dead, leaving Morrison alone with his complicated feelings about success achieved through morally questionable means. That evening, Morrison walked through Harlem streets for the first time in years without armed backup. Families sat on stoops enjoying cool autumn air. Teenagers played basketball under streetlights. Elder residents discussed neighborhood news on park benches. A young mother approached him with her small daughter. Captain Morrison, thank you for making our neighborhood safe again. Sarah can finally play outside without me worrying constantly. Their eyes met across the small park. Bumpy nodded respectfully. Morrison found himself nodding in return, in acknowledgement of mutual understanding rather than friendship. This was how a racist police captain learned to work with his former enemy, and how the results exceeded everyone's expectations except those of the man who had orchestrated everything from the beginning. Morrison would never forget the most important lesson of his career. Sometimes the best police work involved doing no police work at all. Sometimes justice came from outside the legal system, and sometimes enemies could become the most effective partners. 6 months later, Morrison retired as the most decorated police captain in New York City history. Harlem's crime statistics remained the lowest in all 5 boroughs. In his farewell speech, Morrison offered wisdom gained through bitter experience. Police work isn't just about arresting criminals. Police work is about protecting communities. And sometimes protecting communities requires unconventional approaches that challenge everything we think we know about law enforcement. Watching the speech on television, Bumpy Johnson smiled approvingly. Smart man, he said to himself. Finally learned the most important lesson. The new police captain, who replaced Morrison, found a note on his desk the first morning. Captain Rodriguez. Harlem has enjoyed 6 months of peace through proper cooperation between community leadership and law enforcement. I hope you will continue this successful approach. Sincerely, B.J. Rodriguez stared at the note in confusion. Who was this mysterious B.J.? He would discover the answer soon enough and face the same moral choices that had challenged his predecessor. Because in Harlem, there was only one true king. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson ruled with wisdom, justice, and an understanding that sometimes the most unexpected alliances produce the most remarkable results. The 48 hours that changed Harlem forever proved that enemies can become partners, that justice sometimes operates outside legal systems, and that the most effective solutions often come from the most unlikely sources.